In this module, we are just going to elaborate what is recoil of gun. Right? So recoil is what? Recoil is nothing but the backward movement or the backward jolt received by a shooter when the gun is discharged. Right? This is called when the shooter shoots, a backward motion or the backward jolt received by the shooter. This jolt is called the recoil. Right? The little backward movement of the gun in the time when it is discharged is called recoil of the gun. And now we have to determine the recoil velocity of the gun when the gun is discharged by a shooter, right? The velocity the gun has in the backward direction or in the opposite direction of the bullet. You have to find out the velocity. Then the velocity is called the recoil velocity, right? And for that we are applying the formula, or we are applying the concept and the knowledge of law of conservation of linear momentum, right? And now think about it. If the mass of the bullet is m1 and the velocity of the bullet is v1, when the shooter shoots the gun, the velocity will be v1 and the mass m1, and the mass of the gun is m2. When the shooter shoots the gun, the velocity in the backward direction is v2. So the velocity of the gun, or the velocity gun has after shooting or in the time of shooting, that is what? v2. So now think about it. Before shooting, when a shooter holds the gun like this, is there any velocity for the bullet and for the gun? No velocity, because both guns and the bullet are in a rest position. There is no velocity. So that time the velocity of the bullet was 0 and the velocity of the gun and the bullet both is 0. So that means no momentum. If there is no velocity, there is no momentum. That means before shooting or before the gun is discharged, the total momentum of that system or the total momentum of the gun is equals to 0. And now think about it. In the time of when the shooter shoots the gun, then the bullet has a velocity and also the gun has a velocity in the backward direction, right? And you can also think in that way. There is a third law of Newton. The third law of Newton also can be applicable here, right? So this is another thing. We're now considering our equation to determine the recoil velocity of the gun. Now think about it. The total momentum is what? After the shoot, or in the time of shooting, the total momentum is what? When the shooter shoots the bullet, the total momentum of the bullet is what? m1 v1, and the total momentum of the gun m2 v2. So the total momentum of the system is m1 v1 plus m2 v2 after the gun is discharged. But before the discharge, there is no momentum. The momentum was 0. And now if we apply the law of conservation of linear momentum or the conservation of momentum, we can directly say in that way that before the discharge, the momentum is exactly equal to the momentum the gun and the bullet or the total system received or total system got is exactly equal, right? So that means 0 is equals to m1 v1 plus m2 v2. So here 0 is what? 0 is the previous momentum, or before the gun is discharged, the momentum was what? 0. And now after the discharge, the momentum will be m1 v1 plus m2 v2. So that means 0 is equals to m1 v1 plus m2 v2. Now if you think about it, here v2 is the what? V2 is the velocity of the gun, or the velocity achieved by the gun in the time of shooting is v2. So v2 is called the recoil velocity of gun. Now think about it. m2 v2 is equals to minus m1 v1. So v2 is equals to minus m1 by m2 into v1. You got it? So v2, I'm repeating again, v2 is equals to minus V2 is minus m1 by m2 into V1. So now can you tell me what is the significance of this negative sign or the minus here? Negative sign signifies that the direction of the gun is the opposite to the direction of the bullet. Because if the bullet is going in like this, the gun got the velocity or the backward movement or the backward jolt like this. So if the V1 as V2 is exactly opposite in a direction, that is why there is negative sign here. So from that equation, we directly can find out and determine the recoil of any gun. That is, the equation is very easy. There is a V2 here. V2 is the recoil velocity of the gun is equals to minus m1 by m2. m1 is what? m1 is the mass of bullet. If you know the mass of bullet, and that is very easy. You should know the mass of bullet, right? Mass of bullet by m2. m2 is the mass of what? m2 is the mass of gun into v1. v1 is the speed of the bullet, right? You can directly go. We will definitely go to the problems regarding this concept and equation.